So, I'd like to talk about the root cause of inconsistent basketball performance today. And more specifically, I want to talk about a bit of a trap that I've seen a lot of players fall into as soon as they start experiencing a little bit of success in basketball. And ultimately, if you fall into this trap, it prevents you from experiencing that success consistently and permanently. So, if you've been seeing fluctuations in your performance, one game you play great, and the next game you are back to struggling again, you're wondering, why is this happening? How am I going to, finally become the consistently great player that I know I can be? This is going to show you why. And hopefully, it's actually going to cure this problem for you if you practice what we teach here. So, I'll start this off with a quick story from my sixth grade season. And this is the first time I really came face to face with this inconsistency and started to figure out like what's going on here. So all year long, I'm playing for my AAU team, averaging, I think, like 6 or 7 points a game, maybe. I was a middle of the pack player, not really starting, but, just average. Until one game late in the year, it's a Saturday morning tournament game in March. I still remember that, where I had 17 points for the first time in my life. Best game I'd ever had. I know it doesn't sound like much, but to me at the time, it was really exciting. And I'm thinking like, oh, this is the player I'm going to be from now on. This is how I'm always going to play. And I'm so excited that I've finally broken through that later that night when we have our next game in the tournament. I go into that game thinking, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play exactly like I did this morning, and it's going to be awesome. And like my team is going to finally know that I'm the man on this team. And all these like really overexcited thoughts are going through my mind. Next thing you know, the game begins. The ball's not really being swung my way in the same way as it was earlier that day. My shots aren't falling as easily. I'm kind of getting locked down by my defender. My other teammates are taking over the game, and I'm fading into the background slowly but surely. And next thing you know, I'm on the bench wondering what happened. Where did the player from this morning go? Why can't I always be that player? And I'm thinking like, wow, inconsistency is so slippery. It's so slippery. How can you be one player one moment and a completely different player the next moment? So it wasn't until, excuse me, much later in my career that I figured out what was actually happening. And it wasn't until actually I retired from basketball that I really dug into this and figured out what the root cause is. So that's what we're going to get into now. And I still remember in 2016, I had the chance to go and work with, I actually moved to Maui for 3 months to train with a Taoist master named Bruce Francis. And so Bruce is this really interesting guy. He's in his mid 70s now, but early on in his life, he was a high level martial artist. He was doing, believe it or not, he was doing cage fighting for money in Japan. He had 8 black belts when he was 19. There's still videos on YouTube, if you can find them, of him like leaving multiple attackers on the ground with like his martial arts skill. Is something out of a movie. And later on in his life, he graduated to practicing and teaching the internal martial arts. So meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, things of that nature. And so I get this big opportunity to train with Bruce, to learn meditation from him. And one day, I will never forget this, one of the other students comes in and they've just had this big awakening experience in their meditation. And the more advanced practices that Bruce teaches allow for these huge experiences to happen in meditation. It's not as simple as like your mind goes still and you become peaceful. No, these are like massive epiphanies about the nature of life and so on. So this person comes in and they're all excited. They're telling Bruce what's happened and they're all animated. Bruce is listening and, he doesn't seem all that impressed, frankly. Person sits down and Bruce this is all he says. He goes, "Oh, so you had some whoopee. That's good. Okay, let's begin." That was it. This person is so deflated and let down. They're like, what? Shouldn't we be having a party? Like, this is huge. One of the best experiences of my life. Like, shouldn't you be congratulating me more? And yet, as Bruce went on to say, the act of getting overly attached and overly emotional about any given experience is what prevents that experience from happening consistently. So here's where we get to the root cause. And he later told this story about how when he had his first big awakening, he meditated for like 3 days in Canton, China. came to his teacher after this experience, and his teacher took one look at him. He was working with this old Taoist sage named Liu up in the mountains. And Liu takes one look at him and he says, "Oh, so you've made some small progress. That's good. Let's practice." That was it. And again, Bruce is like, shouldn't flowers be raining from the sky? Like, what's going on? Why is this not a bigger deal? And once again, the fundamental tenet here is that emotionally attaching to any experience, whether incredibly positive and profound or disappointing and deflating and negative, no matter what the experience is, as soon as you emotionally attach to it, you essentially create this fluctuation and inconsistency within your experience. So me getting overly emotionally attached and attributing all this meaning and saying, this is my big turning point, this is my big moment, I've just scored 17 points, so from now on I'm going to score 17 every game, and this is the player that I am from now on. The act of getting really emotionally attached and excited about that is what caused the crash later that night. So in deep game, this is one of our fundamental laws. We call this the law of extremes. And the law of extremes states that as emotion increases, consistency decreases. So the more emotionally attached you are to any experience, the more inconsistent your experience will be. Okay? Now, as inconsistency is by definition a fluctuation in your performance, we have really two ways that this can happen, and it's important to understand both sides. So we have positive attachment, where you are trying to prolong or hold on to a positive experience. In my case, that 17-point game, I was trying so hard to recreate it that it like slipped through my fingers. Just like if you're trying to palm a basketball and you're gripping it so hard that it slips through your fingers, that's what happened to me that game. And the harder I tried to play well, the more difficult that game became. On the flip side to that, we have negative attachment, where you're trying to push away a negative experience. And you might say like, well, how is that attachment? You're pushing away. Well, why are you pushing away? Because you're attached to the positive experience and trying to have that one rather than experience this, this challenging situation, let's say going scoreless in a game. And the best example of this is like, we've all had this, right? Where at the top of your jump shot, right before you release the ball, you have this little flicker of a thought in your mind saying, I better not miss this shot. And on the shots that you have that flicker of a thought, you of course miss the shot. And it's like that famous Kobe Bryant quote, if you're afraid to fail, you're probably going to fail. That is the case with negative attachment. Being negatively attached and trying to push away a negative experience makes it much more likely to actually happen. So whether you are attached to a positive experience or a negative experience, either one, that is going to cause inconsistency. And it's sort of like, I'll share one final analogy with you before we move on. We've all had, a situation where we're trying really hard to gain the approval of somebody. Maybe it's a coach or somebody older, or maybe it's a girl that you like. You're trying to make this person like you. And the harder you try to make them like you, the more you push them away, because you come off as needy, and the last thing that they want to do is actually give you their approval if you're trying really hard to get it. In reverse, what if maybe it's like a younger sibling or some person at school or whatever? What if some other person is coming to you and trying so hard to impress you, trying really hard to gain your approval and to get you to congratulate them for something? What is the last thing you're going to want to do? The last thing you're going to want to do is give your approval. And so it's the same push-pull that we have here. The harder you try to gain approval, the less likely you are to get it. The more somebody else tries to gain your approval, the less likely you are to give it. And we get this, again, fluctuation, inconsistency. So one point that I want to get across here, I don't want you to fall for thinking that this means that you can't enjoy experiences that you're having. If you win the NBA title and you're like popping champagne, lighting cigars, and back in the locker room celebrating with your team, you have every right and you are totally deserving to enjoy that experience. That is no problem whatsoever. The trap that you will fall into is attributing more meaning than is necessary and actually using that experience to prop up your ego. So that's a really key difference. Let's go back to when I had that 17-point game. If I just enjoy that experience for what it is, and I say, oh, wow, that was a great game. I really enjoyed that. And like I allow myself to feel good about it. That's no problem. The problem is when I get really excited and attribute all this meaning and say, that's the player I'm going to be from now on. I've finally broken through. I've become the player I've always wanted to be. That's when the attachment occurs. The attachment occurs through your ego. It's not necessarily through just the pleasant sensation of the experience. And when you, well, I'd like to actually share something with you. So you may have seen this, but I'll share it anyhow. Giannis, after winning the NBA championship, time of recording this is recent, so 2021 finals. Giannis, actually this was midway through the series, so not after winning, but he had a really good quote during one of the interviews to the media. So Giannis's quote goes like this: "Usually, when you think about how well you played, the next day, you're going to suck. When you focus on the past, that's your ego. When you focus in the future about how you're going to dominate, that's your pride talking. So I try to focus in the moment, in the present." That really says it all. And the first part of it specifically, when you think about how well you played, usually the next day you're going to suck. That was exactly what happened with that 17-point game and then the crash later on that evening. So once again, it's sort of like this meta level law of extremes. As emotion increases, consistency decreases. Allowing yourself to get too emotionally attached and attributing too much meaning to any one experience, positive, negative, or otherwise, is what causes the inconsistency. And really the instruction that we give here and that I give in the masterclass as well. If you haven't watched that, by the way, deepgame.com right now, go do it. Most of our players have watched that already, but if you haven't, do it. The instruction we give there is just simply don't get too high, don't get too low. You've probably heard players talk about this. Kobe has been saying this, or Kobe said this many, many times throughout his career. Not too high, not too low. Stay even-keeled. This is the watermark of the veteran, experienced basketball player. Actually, the person that comes to mind is Greg Popovich, not a player, but a coach. He is like the best at this because whenever his teams are struggling, the media will say like, what are you guys panicking? Like, what's the state of panic in the locker room? They'll ask like, what's going on here? And Popovich is always like, no, it's fine. It's just basketball. Like, things change all the time. We had a bad game. We'll move on. He's so nonchalant about it. And then when they experience a lot of success and the media tries to play it up and get really excited about it, he's like, yeah, it's great. It's great. That's it. Like, he's so even-keeled. And it's really worth going back and watching some old Greg Popovich, like best of Pop, Coach Pop videos on YouTube, because he's so good at this, where he's so experienced and he's been around the block so many times that he just knows that positive experiences don't last forever, and neither do negative experiences. Everything changes. And it gives him this stable center from which to execute from. And ultimately, the realization that you have as you'll develop and navigate through your career is that success will happen for you much more consistently once it's not a big deal that you're having success. And this might seem like a little bit of a letdown, like, oh, you have to sacrifice all of this excitement and like drama in order to experience the success more consistently. Because when you first start to have success, it's like the biggest thing in the world. It's only once it's not the biggest thing in the world and it's not the biggest deal that you actually start to have it consistently. And at that point, it isn't, because you are having it consistently. So it's no longer a big deal. So you do have to sacrifice a little bit of that excitement and getting all emotional and attributing all of this meaning and so on and so forth to these positive experiences. You've got to give that up and just allow yourself to be in the moment. Yes, enjoy it when it comes. When you have challenge, understand that too will pass, that all things change, and come back to that stable center. Your teammates, your friends, your family, the people around you will feed off of that stability in you. You will become really the centerpiece to those around you, whether it's your team or your friend group. Somebody who is completely stable, they're never getting too high, never getting too low, is the person that people look to for leadership. It's the person that people look to for reliability, because they know they're not going to fluctuate and be inconsistent. They're going to be stable. Like a Damian Lillard comes to mind. After he hits these huge game winners, he's not going crazy and like yelling and screaming and stuff like that. He's kind of straight-faced. There's a reason for that, and this is the reason, okay? So understand, I'd like to share one final story with you, actually. And this is from my final year of high school basketball when we won the league title. This is the first title that I won in my high school career, my final year. And at the very end of the game, I had an awesome game, came out firing. And we had our assistant coach was actually my AAU coach. And he was this wise old man. He had like a white hair and that was wrapped in a ponytail, and he used to ride a motorcycle. Just a really interesting guy and really good basketball mind. He was also an assistant at the university level, and an older man, like in his late 60s, I believe. And so his name was Quiggs. So I love this guy, actually. And so anyhow, this game happens. We are on the way to winning the title. There's like, the clock is ticking down. There's less than 2 minutes left or something like that. My teammates and I are on the bench because we're winning by quite a lot. And myself and my two best friends in the team are at the end of the bench, like jumping up and down. We're really excited about this. And Quiggs, just nonchalant, comes over to us and he says, "Hey, act like it's happened before." Act like it's happened before. And suddenly I came back to center and I was like, oh yeah, like on it, we deserve this. We've earned it. There's no reason to get all crazy about it. Like, this is ours. We earned it. And that sort of stability that he instilled in me is something that, like, throughout the rest of my life, I have tried to carry with me to the best of my ability. And it's something that, if you want lasting success in your life, you will need to begin to embody, okay? Success will happen for you much more regularly when having success is no longer such a big deal. There's not as much emotional meaning behind that success. So that is the root cause of inconsistency. It is getting too emotionally attached to any experience that you have. Come back to center and you will be much more stable and much more consistent in your performance throughout all of your career. So that is our lesson for today. If you've been experiencing fluctuations in your performance, I hope this helps you out. And if you have any questions about this, let me know. I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to share one final little story. This might be a weirder one, but I'll share it anyway now that I brought it up. So, actually first I'm going to take a drink of water. I've been talking for a while now. You can probably hear it in my voice. So I'll share this final story, and this is an interesting one. This is one that's passed down in the Tibetan meditation tradition. So the Tibetans will give this story to illustrate the exact same point. And there was this very, this like old Tibetan Lama, master level enlightened being. And he's meditating. This is a metaphor, by the way. It's I don't think it's an actual literal story. This is just a teaching story. So there's this old enlightened Lama sitting up at the top of this mountain, and he's meditating and meditating and meditating. And at the peak of it, he's actually been meditating for like 3 weeks in a row. He hasn't moved a muscle. And all of the like angels come down from the heavens and they start raining down flowers on him and congratulating him and playing trumpets. And again, this is a metaphor, but the teaching is the same. They're playing music and congratulating him, and they're, making this big deal out of it. They're so impressed with this enlightened being meditating for 3 weeks in a row. And finally, the Lama, as these angels are like playing their music and whatnot, he takes a stick and he whacks at them and says, "Get out of here." And the reason he does that is because they were distracting him from his practice. There was no reason to get emotionally attached and excited about his achievement. There was simply the one foot in front of the other process of walking the path and doing the practice consistently and stable and in a stable way. Okay. So take that thought with you. Again, that's just a metaphor, but it's one that I really love. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Hey, it's Coach Taylor. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. And if you did, the best thing to do right now while it's fresh in your mind is head over to deepgame.com and take our free masterclass where you'll actually learn all 8 laws of the deep game and all of the fundamentals that you need to know about the part of basketball that is played with the mind. This is something that our players have called the best hour of basketball learning of their lives, and I think it's going to be so powerful for you. So once again, this is totally free of charge. Head over to deepgame.com now, and I will see you over there.